Sometimes y'all, we literally have to break it in order to rebuild it. And so my question for you today is, what's breaking? Welcome back to Breaking Cycles Across Generations. Episode 2 is all about understanding each generation a little more deeply. Understanding beyond communication styles. Some of the why behind each generation's response to trauma. And I am your host, Evangelist Donna Brown, and I'm glad to have you here as we explore breaking cycles, breaking barriers, and I endeavor to help break it all down. But listen, if you are just joining me, you picked a good time to show up. And I have to tell you, if you have not heard episode 1, The 3 Touches, where I hosted with Chess Brown, my son, cameo appearance from my granddaughter, I encourage you to go back and listen. Why? Because what Chess and I laid down in episode 1, it's really the foundation for everything we're building in this podcast as we seek to unite generations from the silent to the alpha, breaking cycles of dysfunction that have held us bound and separated. Quick recap for those of you who were with me. You heard me share what I call the 3 touches: the destructive touch of abuse, the healing touch of restoration, and the revealing touch, which is all about truth and discovery. I was able to surprise my son Chess, who hosted that episode with me, about something that God placed in my spirit. He was able to hear something he wasn't prepared for. I disclosed to him my 4th touch. And really, it's all about communications, understanding communication styles, being vulnerable, being transparent, and having honest conversations. And sometimes that requires demolition and then rebuilding. So yeah, we went there. But listen, today I just needed to be just me and you. So pull up a chair, get your tea, your coffee, your juice, whatever it is that helps you settle in. You could be on a jogging trail, a walking path, or a passenger in a car. What I'm getting ready to share requires a kind of space where it's just us communicating. No distractions, just us. Because I'm going to talk to you today about why your grandmama may act or have acted the way she did, about your millennial children, why they keep sending you articles about boundaries, and your Gen Z niece or nephew, they just done put your uncle on blast at Thanksgiving dinner and perhaps split the family group chat clean in half. Oh, I know that only happens in my family, and that doesn't happen in yours. Don't y'all act like you don't know what I'm talking about. All right, y'all, listen. It's easy for someone to look from generation to generation in the gaps that exist and think that it's about whether or not grandma prefers a phone call while grandkids want to just send a TikTok or a message. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's surface stuff. In this episode, we're going to go deeper. We're going to be talking about why I believe different generations respond to trauma so differently, and about some strategies of how we can finally stop fighting each other long enough to actually heal. Because you know what? Grit and dirt does not feel good in an open wound. And these aren't just preferences, y'all. These are survival strategies. And I promise you, you'll get it in a minute. And so if you're a note taker, get your notepad. Here's a quick prayer. Lord, help us now, because we're about to take it deep. I'm going to start off with looking through generational lens, and I'll call this part one. And I'll be honest with you. When I first started processing and thinking about generations and trauma, I literally thought that some of it was as deep as some older folks are just set in their ways and stubborn, and some younger folks just think they know everything. Problem solved? Dead wrong. Because as I processed and unraveled my trauma, and the more I listened to survivors from different generations, and y'all, I probe and I be listening when y'all are talking, and folks are talking, because I'm trying to understand. And I mean, listen. And the more I listen, the more I realize that we're not dealing with stubbornness and disrespect. We are actually dealing with completely different worldviews about safety, authority, family, and what it even means to get help. And y'all, the way I process things is I gotta see it. And so I'm gonna paint this little picture for you. Imagine a woman in her 80s. Let's call her Mother Jenkins. Mother Jenkins survived the Depression. She watched her daddy lose his job and her family nearly lose everything. And she learned, not from a book, from life, that family survival depends on keeping your business private. She learned you don't air your dirty laundry, you handle it. You endure, you pray, and you do not give people outside of your home ammunition to destroy what little you have. And so I want you to also imagine her great-granddaughter, 16 years old. Let's call her Jalen. Jalen learned about consent in elementary school. She's been taught since kindergarten that if someone touches you wrong, you tell. She believes down in her bones that silence protects the abuser, not the victim. And that if you see something, you say something. And that's not opinion to Jalen. That's her moral truth. And so put Mother Jenkins and Jalen in the same room when a family secret comes out. You see where I'm going? Here is what we need to understand. Both of them are right, and both of them are limited. Mother Jenkins, she's not wrong that exposure can destroy a family. Why? Because she's seen it happen. And Jalen isn't wrong that silence allows abuse to continue. She's right about that too. But until we understand the why behind each generation's response, we can't build bridges between them. And hear me on this and say it with me if you need to. We've been so busy defending our generation, we forgot we're all trying to get to the same place. What are you saying? I'm saying that every generation learns and develops their coping strategies in response to the world that they grew up in. These aren't personality quirks. They are just their survival strategies. And they're strategies that got passed down through families and communities like heirlooms. Only nobody asked if we still needed them. Let me break it down quick before we go deep. Let's look at the silent generation. They learn to endure because they lived through economic collapse and world war. And the baby boomers, they learn to build institutions because they grew up in a time of expansion and believed in the system. Gen X, they learned self-reliance because they were latchkey kids home alone when both parents worked. And our millennials, they learned to seek professional help because therapy finally became acceptable. And Gen Z, they learned to speak up and to speak out because they watched what silence cost the generations before them. And y'all, I'm coming up on our babies, Gen Alpha. They are quick and they can smell genuine from a fake from a mile away. They learned to adapt, y'all, before they could walk. Why? Because they were born with a phone screen or an iPad screen in one hand and a crisis in the other. They don't wait for permission. They don't wait for instructions. And they sure don't wait for answers. They Google it. They build it or skip it entirely. And so I'm telling you, don't count them out or too young. They are the generation that will break cycles we don't even know exist yet. And the truth is, we can't build a bridge with only one type of material. And if we think about it this way, the silent generation is the foundation. They know how to endure when everything is falling apart. Boomers are the structure. They know how to build systems that last. Gen X, that's the steel reinforcement. Independent, strong, holding it together when no one's watching. And our millennials, they're the engineers. They're analyzing, they're processing, and they're asking, how do we make it better? Gen Z, that's the inspection team, calling out every weak point before someone gets hurt. And Alpha, they're the architects who will design what comes next. You take one of these generations out, and the whole thing either weakens or collapses. Generational healing, y'all, it doesn't happen in isolation. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, in different silos. It happens in community. Everybody, everyone represented in some form or fashion at the table and together. Now, how this connects to my story? My mother, she was silent generation. And I mean silent. The abuse I experienced, she may or may not have known, not from my lips. She passed down to me a level of being silent, and I stayed silent, and I didn't talk about it, and I didn't tell. But in my mind, as I was processing, I felt if she knew, I believed in her mind that keeping the secret was keeping me safe, keeping the family together, keeping a roof over our head, keeping food over the table. She wasn't evil. She was traumatized without therapy and unfortunately operating out of survival patterns that she learned when survival meant silence. And guess what? It took me years to understand that. Years of trauma, hurt, and some anger. Years of how you might have let that happen to me before I could see that she was doing what her generation taught her to do. And I was doing what she taught me to do. You see the cycle? Dysfunction. It doesn't make it right. And I want to be clear about that. Understanding is not excusing. But here it is. Understanding does open the door to healing in a way that blame never can. And so I want to go generation by generation, and I want you to listen for your people, for your grandparents, for your parents, for your children, and for yourself. Because I believe somewhere in here, you may find the key that unlocks a conversation you have been avoiding. In part two, I'm going to talk about the generations in depth. I'm going to start with the elders, the silent generation born between 1928 to 1945, and the baby boomers, my generation, born between 1946 to 1964. The silent generation earned their name because they learned early that survival often required quiet endurance. Think about what it is they lived through as children. The Great Depression, people losing everything, standing in bread lines, watching their parents' faces when there wasn't enough food for everyone. And then as teenagers and young adults, this generation, they experienced World War II. Husbands and sons shipped overseas, Gold Star mothers rationing and sacrifice. For them, keeping the family together meant keeping family problems private. They learned through hard experiences that outside interference could make things worse, not better. And so I need you to hear this, especially if you're a younger person listening, and if you've been frustrated with your grandmother, your grand aunt, an elder in your church who seems to look the other way. Your grandmother wasn't old-fashioned. She was traumatized. And when someone from this generation hesitates to report abuse or trauma or seek outside help, it's usually not because they don't care about the child's safety. It's because they learned through watching families crumble that exposure could mean destruction. And so here it is, another example. It's 1952. A woman tells someone at church that her husband drinks. He gets rough with the kids. What happens? He loses his job at the factory when word gets around. She can't work because married women didn't then and wasn't considered respectable. They can't pay the rent or the house note. Bank takes the house. The church prays for them from a distance, and the children go hungry. She learned her lesson to keep her mouth shut, and unfortunately, that's a lesson that she passed down. And now here's what's important, and what I need younger people listening to really hear this. Their faith is also deeply rooted in biblical justice. Here's what they understand. They understand righteousness, accountability, and God's protection of the innocent. And when we frame abuse response in terms they recognize, like protecting the flock, standing for righteousness, leaving a godly legacy, they actually become powerful advocates. The key is speaking their language, not demanding that they learn yours. And so now I'm going to move into the baby boomers. Boomers are different from the silent generation. They grew up during the post-war boom, during the civil rights movement, the beginning of massive social change. They learned that institutions can be challenged and changed, but they also invested heavily in building better institutions. Think about it. Boomers created many of our current church structures, school systems, and community organizations. They have ownership in these systems in ways that our younger generations don't understand. And so when there's a problem in the church or school, their instinct is to work with leadership to address it, not to blow it up from the outside. They want to fix systems from within, and they're more open than the silent generation to seeking professional help. They want to be at the table making decisions about their family. A modern illustration is you have a boomer grandmother who finds out that her granddaughter was touched inappropriately by a youth leader at church. Her first instinct is not to call the police. It's to call the pastor. Not because she doesn't care, but it's because she believes the church should handle church problems. And she trusts the system that she helped to build. And now her millennial daughter is furious. She's like, Mom, we need to report this. And the grandmother says, well, let's see what pastor says first. We don't want to ruin a man's life if there's been a misunderstanding. Now, both of these women love that little girl, and both of them want to protect her, but they have completely different playbooks. And I'm going to say something that might step on some toes, but it needs to be said. The same mouth that says respect your elders need to say protect your children. Those two things are not in conflict. A true elder, a biblical elder, understands that their authority is meant to shield the vulnerable, not to silence them. I'm going to move into Gen X and Millennials. Gen X was born between 1965 to 1980, and the Millennials born between 1981 to 1996. These are the generations caught between traditional family values and modern understanding of trauma. And honestly, this generation is doing the heaviest lifting in this work. Gen X, they're fascinating because they're truly a bridge generation. Many of them were latchkey kids. They came home from school to an empty house with a key on a string around their neck or tucked in their socks. They made themselves a snack, they did their homework, and raised themselves in a lot of ways. And they learned early. Don't expect anyone to save you. Figure it out for yourself. And y'all, that shaped everything for them. Gen X adults are fiercely protective of their children. Sometimes they're protective in ways that seems intense to other generations because they remember what it felt like to be unsupervised, to be unseen, to figure out danger on their own, and they're determined not to repeat that with their kids or kids who fall under their authority. But here's the challenge. Gen X struggles with asking for help. They learned that self-reliance wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. And so y'all, when crisis hits, they often try to handle it alone when they would benefit from community support. And let me give you a real world example, and it's one I've seen played out more times than I can count. We have a Gen X mom. She discovers her teenage son was being groomed online. Her first instinct, handle it. She blocked the account. She takes away the phone. She has a stern conversation. Problem solved? Not hardly. She doesn't tell her husband because she doesn't want to make it a big thing. Doesn't tell the school because it didn't happen there. Doesn't call a counselor because we can work through this as a family. Doesn't report it to authorities because I already stopped it. But 6 months later, her son is struggling with shame that he can't name, and she's drowning in anxiety that she won't admit to. That's Gen X. Protective? Absolutely. Asking for help? That feels like failure to them. Gen X, they learn to speak both languages out of pure survival. Things like, well, back in my day, we handled things ourselves. Into millennial speak. He's describing a trauma response that's rooted in his generational context. And they can translate, I need to set boundaries around this conversation. Back into boomer, she's going to need a minute. Listen, they've been doing unlevel diplomacy at Thanksgiving dinner since 1987. And while grandmom's upset about the kneeling and the grandkids are upset about the carbon footprint of the turkey, Gen X is in the kitchen refilling their drink going, I just came here to eat. I just came here to eat. But here is the gift in the middle position. They understand everybody. They remember rotary phones, and they learned to program the VCR for their parents and taught their kids how to use the first iPhone. They're bilingual in analog and digital, traditional and modern. Respect your elders and protect your peace. That's why Gen X doesn't just build bridges, they are the bridge, y'all. Our millennials, let me just talk to you directly for a minute. Millennials are the first generation to grow up with widespread awareness of therapy, trauma, and mental health. Y'all have vocabulary for things that my generation couldn't name. Toxic relationships, narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, and boundaries. I didn't know what that kind of boundary was until I was in my 40s. Y'all learned it from Instagram. But here's what I see. You all are carrying a tremendous burden as the cycle breaking generation. You feel responsible for healing not just yourselves, but your entire family systems. Let me describe your life and see if I'm close. You're in therapy, or you were until you couldn't afford it anymore. You're reading trauma books. You're trying to educate your parents about dysfunction, which goes about as well as teaching a cat to swim. You're setting boundaries with extended family and getting called disrespectful for doing so. You're consciously parenting your children, gentle parenting, emotion coaching, whatever they're calling it this week. You're doing it all while healing from your own childhood experiences. You're exhausted. You're not lazy. You're exhausted and nobody seems to notice because you're carrying the emotional work for multiple generations. You really are. Here's a scene that plays out in families every day. A millennial daughter sends her boomer mother a carefully crafted text message. Probably took her 2 hours and 3 friends' opinion to write, explaining why she needs space from her father after learning about something that happened when she was a child. The mother's response? I don't know why you have to bring up the past. That was a long time ago. Your father has changed. You're going to tear this family apart. The daughter's feeling unheard, invalidated, like her pain doesn't matter. The mother feels attacked and confused, like her daughter is being influenced by all of this therapy stuff that she's going through. The fact is, neither is wrong about their feelings. They're just speaking completely different languages. And here is, millennials, what I need you to hear, and I need you to receive this. You cannot heal your parents or change your extended family system. Why? Because that is not your job. Your job is to break the cycle in your own nuclear family and to protect your children. Your parents may never acknowledge harm or seek therapy, and that's not your failure or your responsibility. You are not failing if they don't get it. You're succeeding if your children are safe, and I need you to let that sit with you for a moment. Gen Z and Alpha generation, you guys are the justice seekers, our youngest generation. Gen Z, born between 1997 and 2012, and the Alpha generation between 2010 and present. Gen Z, they grew up with something that no generation before them ever had. The entire internet in their pocket since middle school. They've always been able to find their people. They don't expect to handle problems alone. Why? Because they know communities exist for everything. They grew up learning about consent, justice, and systemic oppression from a young age. They believe at a fundamental level that silence protects perpetrators, not the victims, and they will act on that belief. So here it is, another illustration that happened at somebody's Thanksgiving table. Might have been yours, might have been mine, might have been everybody's. The families gathered. Sweet potatoes are being passed. Somebody mentioned Uncle Jerome is coming by. He's going to stop by later. And 17-year-old Maya, who learned something from her cousin last summer that nobody else heard, puts her fork down and says, Uncle Jerome isn't allowed around the kids anymore, and here's why. Now, great-grandmama is over there clutching her pearls. Grandmama is crying. Mama is frozen, and Dad is looking for the door. And the cousins under 12 are quietly being escorted to the back room. The family group chat, it will never recover. There might be some screenshots, sides will be taken, and some folks won't speak for years. And you know what? That 17-year-old might have just protected her little cousin from something that nobody else was willing to name. That's Gen Z. They're not waiting for permission. They're not going through channels. They're not protecting family reputation over family members. They're not. And so is their approach always wise? Maybe not. Sometimes they move faster than family systems can adapt. Sometimes their directness overwhelms people who need time to process. And sometimes they don't understand that great-grandmother's hesitation comes from real trauma, not just old-fashioned thinking. But their willingness to speak truth, regardless of consequence, that's a gift. Sometimes it takes what that young voice is saying, y'all. No, I'm not okay with this, and I'm not going to pretend that it is. And here's something I want every generation to sit with. Every generation thinks that their generation invented truth-telling, when reality is every generation needs the generation before them to give them roots. Gen Z, you didn't invent courage. Your grandmother had it. She just had to hide it to survive. And Grandma, you didn't invent wisdom. Your grandchildren have it. They just express it differently than you did. We need each other. The roots and branches are part of the same tree. And if this is hitting close to home, take a breath. And so let me just roll up on our alpha generation, 15 years of age and younger, from high school to newborners. They are the new bridge, and they're watching the silent generation fade. They're watching baby boomers retire. They're watching Gen X finally exhale, and guess what? They're watching millennials parent differently. And then they're watching Gen Z speak up. This generation is taking notes, and parents, you need to know, they're the first generation raised by parents who are actively in therapy, who talk about mental health, and who are trying to break cycles in real time. The teenagers are growing up watching their millennial parents do the work, and elementary kids are growing up in homes where we don't talk about that. It's being replaced with, let's talk about it. And that's powerful. But here's the responsibility. They're watching us to see if we really mean it, and if we're really breaking cycles, or if we're just talking about it. The 15-year-olds can tell if you are a fake. A 5-year-old can tell when you are not authentic. And they need us to be real, not perfect. They need us to admit when we're wrong. They need us to show them that healing is possible, not just for them, but for us too. They watch and they pay attention to everything. And by God, their level of discernment is deeper than we know. And while we may not want to admit it, they're a lot quicker than we ever were. Part 5. As we wrap up this deep dive, here's what I want you to take away. Every generation developed their approach to trauma and family problems in response to real threats and real challenges. None of these approaches were wrong. They're survival strategies that worked in specific contexts. For example, an 80-year-old woman who wants to handle things within the family, she's not enabling abuse. She just may need education about how to do that effectively and safely. A 16-year-old who wants to report immediately isn't being disrespectful to the family. She may just understand something important about stopping cycles. The 45-year-old trying to handle everything alone isn't being stubborn. She's doing what got her through her childhood. A 35-year-old setting boundaries and sending boundary texts isn't tearing the family apart. She's trying to stop tearing herself apart. The conflict is usually about methods, not goals. And when families can focus on shared values, y'all, safe children, healthy relationship, truth and healing, vulnerability and transparency, then they can often find ways to honor everyone's concerns while ensuring safety. And the most powerful healing happens when all generations contribute their strength. Older generations bring wisdom, authority, and long-term commitment. When they decide to act, people listen. Middle generations bring protective energy and bridge-building skills. They translate between old and young. Younger generations, they bring fresh perspectives and a willingness to break what's broken. They ask the question that nobody else will ask. And when we work together, instead of working against each other, we create communities where disclosure leads to healing, and where children become truly safe, and where cycles of abuse finally stop. Healing happens when we build bridges, cross bridges, connected bridges, instead of walls. And in our next episode, episode 3, we're going to get very practical. Crisis response. What to do in those critical first hours and days when abuse is disclosed, and how to adapt our responses to different generational needs. And so, if today's episode has brought up questions about your own family dynamics or generational patterns, remember, understanding is the first step towards healing. You are not alone in this work, and I pray that you are enlivened and look forward to you joining me for episode 3. And I'd also like you to remember that Breaking Cycles Across Generations podcast is a covering and a movement that supports Talitha Kumi, which is a nonprofit that's aimed at specifically providing support, permanent housing, and permanent healing for women and children in the greater New Orleans area. If you want to be a part of Breaking Cycles in a tangible way, visit my bio link and click on Support Women and Children. Thank you for joining me for Breaking Cycles Across Generations. Until next time, also remember that every generation has wisdom to offer, and healing happens when we build bridges that connect instead of walls. And again, I'm Evangelist Donna Brown. Stay blessed, stay encouraged, and keep breaking cycles. God bless you.